So the home had to be pretty much self-sustaining. You got some supplies from a ship, and that came how often?
I think it was about once a month. It might have been once a week, but that was later. But I think it was about once a month.
So what sort of things did you get locally, and what sort of things did you grow, and what sort of things did you get by ship?
Okay, I'll start out with the local first. When I first got there, it's my understanding that the acreage that was cleared for putting in a garden was around 5 or 6 acres. By the time I left, we had about 20 acres of that cleared. Now, in the garden, our biggest crop was potatoes. A lot of potatoes was grown there. It was a good place for growing potatoes. And then we had some hotbeds where we started cabbages and some other plants like that, kale, cauliflower, and then those were later transplanted to the regular garden. And in some cases, we had what was called a hot cap, which was a sort of well, it looked like a cap. It just went over the plant, and it protected it from the wind and the rain, but the light could get through, and that would give the plant a good start. Of course, we had a lot of manure, so we spread that around a little bit in more ways than one. We also grew...
Where did you get the manure from?
Sparrows? No. Actually, we got the manure from the cows. We had quite a few cows there. I say quite a few. It wasn't a big dairy, but there was enough milk supplied by the cows that we had to give all of the children milk there. And in my book, I point out the amount of savings, but it was over $1,000 a year that they saved in growing the crop and the milk. The expenses were placed against the benefits, and we had a plus.
How about chicken manure? Did you use that?
There was a little bit of chicken manure used probably in the early part. We had up to about 100 chickens at one time. Chickens produced enough eggs during the summer, the latter part of spring, all summer, and the early part of fall. And when it began to cool down, of course the chickens cooled down. They didn't give out as many eggs, and so we didn't have as many eggs. You'd have to sort of save up for them until you had enough to give everyone an egg or make up some kind of a salad, egg salad or something like that. But we had about 100 chickens there that were laying, and they were their pen was over by this building that I talked about first, the carryout building. We also had some pet dogs there that were used for transporting supplies in the wintertime. But I only bring this up because dogs and chickens, particularly, well, almost any dog will go after a chicken, and they did. They killed all of the chickens. But we did get our chicken crop back, and after that, the dogs were gone. But the cows, we had, I think, up to about 14 milkers. We had a pretty nice barn. It had a concrete floor with a gutter in the back so that the cow could lie down, and the manure could be shoveled into the gutter, and then it went down into what we call the cesspool. And then there was a large pump, a bilge pump, that took the liquor out of the cesspool, and that was used for fertilizer for leaf growing plants. Cows, we had a few goats for evidently it was thought that goat's milk was healthier for some diseases than others, and the kids that were very frail were given goat's milk. And we had pigs, and pigs were slaughtered just before Thanksgiving each year, and so we had pork and bacon and that kind of stuff. Cabbage, a lot of the cabbage was made into a slaw, put into a barrel, and eventually made into sauerkraut. However, if you make a mistake, you can't hardly live around rotten cabbage. And a few mistakes were made. We did have, in addition to that, we had what was called a cool room, where after the potatoes were picked, they were placed in this cool room, and then one of the added jobs later in the wintertime and spring was to go in there and sort the potatoes, take out the rotten ones. Usually the rotten ones were gotten rid of by throwing them at each other, and they smell too. It's a very bad odor. We had a freezer room where if we got a big, if a cow was killed or we got moose, they were placed in the freezer until it was ready to use. And it was frosted pipes, I think. Let's see, they use ammonia of some sort to cool the pipes down so they had frost. Anyway, it was cool. We also received from the generous people in the state of Washington, and I think some in Oregon, would send up boxes of apples, and those were placed in the cool room, and they too had to be sorted at some time, because you can't leave an apple rotting with other apples, and the next thing you know you have a bunch of rotten apples. But those were the things that help keep the expenses down at the home. And then once in the early years, some of the merchants downtown provided the home. I know at least on a couple of occasions, on Thanksgiving and Christmas, they furnished the turkey. Some of the merchants did in town. So we had turkey. We had no reason to think that, and this was in the early 30s, we had no reason to think that there was a depression on. We were well fed. Fresh bread, potatoes, sometimes meat, sometimes hot cakes or French toast. We all ate.
And so sometimes the ships, like I saw one ship, the Nikki Na, it burned.
Yeah, that was a missionary ship. There were two different boats that I remember. One was it St. Helens? And the Nickinaw. They were boats that used Seward Harbor as a staging area, and then they went out what we called westward, which was down the peninsula, and stopped in little villages along the way to provide service to the people or whatever help they could give from there down to Alaska.
Now, how about the ships that came up from Seattle? You thought they came up about once a month. What would happen if they couldn't make it in? Did you ever notice that there were times when you didn't have the supplies?
Yep. In fact, the first year that the Clarks were there, that would have been 1937-38. This wasn't due to the ship, but it was due to the longshoremen went on strike, and the ships weren't unloaded, and so we didn't get the supplies from those ships until after the strike was settled. However, we did have some. I think the ship Yukon went down, ran on the rocks. You just have to wait until the next one comes in. I think the the line running at that time was the Alaska Steamship Line, which ran even when you were in Ketchikan.
All right.